It's the Growing for Market podcast.
Calcium, for example, one of the reasons that it's really valuable in the soil is as you add it, it tends to open up the soil structure, and the soil platelets actually start to come up more vertical. And so you get more water percolation going down through, you get more air space for the aerobic biology there, and it's fantastic from a soil structure perspective. But if you just keep adding calcium, because you saw a lot of great benefit for years of just putting it on, you can get that calcium to too high of a percentage, and then the soil structure can actually start to collapse back on itself. And if you get to that point, how are you going to open it back up again? You were using calcium to do that. Now what? So oftentimes an excess is a lot more difficult to take care of than a deficiency. So we encourage people, really don't just do it because that's the way grandpa did it. Or, some smart person told you just keep doing this and you'll be great. We would really like you to do the soil test, and then let's use those numbers to balance it so that it fits the Albrecht methodology.
Hello, and welcome to the Growing for Market podcast, where we talk about growing, marketing, and the business of growing flowers and vegetables for local markets. I'm Andrew Mefford, your host and the editor of Growing for Market magazine, proudly celebrating 35 years in 2026 as the magazine by and for vegetable and flower market farmers. If you're enjoying the podcast, just wait till you see the magazine. Go to growingformarket.com for more. Also, if you could give us a follow and a rating, it really helps other like-minded people find the podcast. And now, let's take a minute to hear from our sponsors. It's with their generous support that we can bring you the podcast for free. Seven Springs Farm Supply is a farm-based supply company focused on serving market gardeners and has been in business for 35 years. Their catalog includes a comprehensive selection of approved for organic fertilizers, pest and disease controls, growing mixes, cover crop seed, and more. They offer custom fertilizer blending and seasonal cooperative purchasing opportunities, and their experienced team is ready to help guide you to the best solution for your farm's needs. Growing for Market listeners are eligible for an exclusive discount. Visit sevenspringsfarm.com/GFM or give them a call at 540-651-3228. That's sevenspringsfarm.com/GFM for an exclusive discount.
Hey, it's Lindsay from Grown By. There are a lot of farm sales platforms out there, but there's only one that's cooperatively owned by farmers. And that's Grown By, your all-in-one solution to simplify farm sales. I'm proud and excited to share two new features now available on top of the tools you already know and love. Number one, our customizable CSA box builder. It allows your customers to simply say what they'd like in their share, and Grown By matches their preferences with your weekly harvest. Number two, our new wholesale-only marketplace. Developed with the Culinary Institute of America, it makes your life easier with a dedicated shop for your wholesale customers. No more texting those chefs. Combining retail and wholesale inventories and records. And, drumroll, automatic payments on due dates. No more chasing down late payments. These new features sit alongside our popular online sales and traditional subscription CSA tools, making it easier than ever to manage your farm's business. As you start to get ready for next season, we'd love to hear from you and see if our cooperative can be a partner in growing your farm. Visit us at grownby.com. That's GROWNBY.com.
Today, we have the pleasure of welcoming Gregg Forster to the Growing for Market podcast. Gregg is the owner of Wisconsin Mineral Solutions in Mondovi, Wisconsin. In that capacity, he has been helping farmers make sense of their soil tests and soil challenges in order to build both the sustainability and prosperity of farms. Over the last 12 years, Gregg has helped farmers with cost-effective, nature-aligned solutions for the production of nutrient-dense crops. So without further ado, welcome to the Growing for Market podcast, Gregg.
Thank you. I'm very glad to be here.
Yeah, well, I'm really happy to have you. In fact, you had reached out to us, and I was glad to hear from you because I feel like, I've been involved in agriculture for 20-ish years now, and I feel like there's a lot more talk about soil health and just what makes a healthy functioning soil and all that kind of stuff over the last few years. I'm just hearing more and more about that, which is a great thing, right? Because of course the farm yields depend on the soil. So I'm glad that we're having that conversation. But can you tell us how you got into the business of helping farmers with their soil health?
Sure. Yeah, it's actually kind of a long story, but
we got time.
Yeah, I spent about 20 years in the world of software engineering. So I have a degree in physics, a Bachelor of Science in Physics, and with some downsizing in the industry, the segment of the software industry I was in, ended up not in that anymore, and was able to turn my interest in agriculture into something that would be business-oriented and not just a pastime.
Oh, cool.
And I mean, on my own kind of hobby farm here, we have about 20 dairy goats, and it's a popular breed that we have called a miniature Nubian. And so our goats tend to be sought after pretty readily. And we grow a number of different types of currants, black currants and red currants and pink and white, and a small little apple orchard. We grow quite a bit of aronia and elderberry. And so all of that kind of interest that we have just kind of lended itself towards making this a business instead of just a pastime. And at some point, I met the owner of Restore Life Minerals, which is a company that has a mine down in the state of Mississippi. And in talking with Larry Streit there, he really kind of opened up my eyes to the super significance of soil. I was aware of some aspects of that before, but just having a deeper conversation with somebody that was very passionate about soil health really kind of made my, various times at Acres USA and other, the Moses, which is now called Marble Seed.
Right, yeah. I've been to that. It's a great conference.
Yeah, kind of fused a lot of those things together in my mind, and that resulted in Wisconsin Mineral Solutions, where we help folks not only look at the balance of nutrients in the soil, but how to make the soil actually rich and vibrant and healthy.
Okay, well, that's a good lead in to tell us about Wisconsin Mineral Solutions, like who you help, what you provide, and, those kinds of details.
Sure. Well, we do sometimes help people that are coming to us looking for help, but a lot of times we just go out and do little educational seminars around the state of Wisconsin. And the farmers that are there, they either resonate with what we're saying and they understand the value of healthy soil. They might or might not know a lot about how to change things, but it clicks with them. And when they do, we're able to really help turn things around on their farms. And if they don't, you can lead a horse to water, but you can't make them drink. And so I don't really try too hard to convince people. I just share knowledge and examples of how things can work on a farm, and then help people understand from my perspective what's actually happening in the soil and how they can leverage that to their advantage instead of just being kind of a victim of what's going on in the environment and with weather and things like that.
Okay. Is there a typical scenario where people start working with you, like a typical problem they're looking to your help to solve? Or do people get in touch because they need help interpreting their soil tests, or maybe they've heard you at an educational event, like you were saying? Like, how do you end up interacting with farmers?
Yeah, quite a few different ways, really. And most of what you mentioned directly applies. So soil tests, a lot of people do soil tests, maybe not very often, but they do and they have them. And people will contact me periodically and just say, what am I supposed to do with this? What does this really mean? And some soil tests give you a lot of direction and help you make good decisions, and others are more just the raw data. And a lot of them don't really understand. But, their mind's not on numbers and everything. They're on the crop and, how how am I going to market this? That whole side of things. So when you get a sheet of paper that just has a bunch of numbers on it, it can be kind of overwhelming. And actually, when I was a software engineer, one of my more important maybe or valued skills was able to take complex ideas and explain them in terms that other people can grasp more easily.
Yes.
And so I really enjoyed doing that. And then now I get to do that with soil tests and some other agronomy principles as well.
Okay. Well, we always liked doing soil tests because I do feel like without a soil test, you're kind of flying blind. Like I used to work in the seed industry, and I would sometimes help troubleshoot people's, like if people had growing problems with the varieties we were selling, I would try and help them troubleshoot their production problems. And I can't tell you how many times people would like send pictures of, a crop that's not doing well or just a description. And I'd be like, well, like what's your most recent soil test look like? And they'd say, I don't know, or I don't have one. And they'd be like, well, this looks a lot like such and such a deficiency or something like that, but we're just guessing unless we know what's in your soil. So, and the approach that we always took was the soil test that we usually got was actually from the University of Maine, and it would have an optimal, it would tell you what your current range for all the made macronutrients and the micronutrients that they did, and it would say an optimal range, and we would just kind of try to get our nutrients into that optimal range. But I don't know if was the best approach to take. So what kind of approach would you take? Like if somebody came to you, I think you said that you've looked at a lot of soil tests with people over the years. So if somebody comes to you with a soil test, how do you approach like making it make sense for fertilization reasons for them?
Right. Well, people come with a lot of different backgrounds and history and how they've managed their soil, and have a certain kind of preconceived ideas sometimes about how soil should be and what's the most important thing to be doing. Some people, really push calcium really hard and think that they should just apply calcium every year because that's just a good thing to do. And it may be, but it might not be too. And there's that phrase that calcium is king, for example.
Yeah, I've heard that.
And calcium is really super, super important. There are a lot of other nutrients that are super important too. And you probably heard that analogy of calcium being the truck that moves the rest of the minerals up into the plant, and boron is the wheels on the truck. And so calcium is really important, but it also needs to be in the right range. And are you familiar with Dr. William Albrecht?
Yes.
So my understanding is that he sent students pretty much all over the world collecting soil samples, and when they pulled out the humus and looked at how all the minerals were balanced in the humus, it was almost the same no matter where the soil came from, whether it was from the forest or agricultural land or a desert even. The humus looked pretty much the same. And so since we're always trying to build the organic matter, the actual humus in the soil, it seemed reasonable to him that why don't we try to balance soil so it's balanced more like the humus itself. So when you look at that, you'll see things like the calcium being pretty close to 68%, and the magnesium being about 12%, and the potassium being 5 to 6% right in there. And so he started balancing soil so that it would look like humus. And when you do that, pretty amazing things happen in the soil. And so that's the approach that we take, is when we're looking at those soil results, we try to get it in that range. And sometimes I know that some agronomists like higher calcium levels, like maybe 72, 73 kind of percent. But we think that you find greater benefit at 68%, like Dr. Albrecht was looking at. Calcium, for example, one of the reasons that it's really valuable in the soil is as you add it, it tends to open up the soil structure. And the soil platelets actually start to come up more vertical. And so you get more water percolation going down through. You get more air space for the aerobic biology there. And it's fantastic from a soil structure perspective. and it relies on sulfur at the right levels to kind of hold that all open. But if you just keep adding calcium, because you saw a lot of great benefit for years of just putting it on, putting it on, you can get that calcium to too high of a percentage, and then the soil structure can actually start to collapse back on itself. And if you get to that point, how are you going to open it back up again? You were using calcium to do that. Now what? And so oftentimes an excess is a lot more difficult to take care of than a deficiency. So we encourage people, really don't just do it because that's the way grandpa did it, or some smart person told you just keep doing this and you'll be great. We would really like you to do the soil test, and then let's use those numbers to balance it so that it fits the Albrecht methodology. And we can talk more about what actually happens in your produce when your soil is balanced that way. We can talk about that in a little bit.
Yeah, I would like to, of course, get to that. I do have a follow-up question for you. When you say calcium at 68% of what?
The base saturation of the cations. So usually when you look at a soil test, there'll be, there's positively charged elements and negatively charged elements. And the cations, they all basically were going to add up to 100%, each of the different ones. So if you had calcium at 68% and magnesium at 12%, that's now 80%, right?
Right, yeah.
So now you have 20 more percent that can be other cations like hydrogen and sodium and your potassium and other cations too. And so that's what the percentages that we're looking at. And most soil tests are going to show that.
Right. Okay. So I was just looking at some soil tests the other day, and people who have looked at their soil tests will notice that is most, if not all, soil tests are listing I'm not sure if I got this right, the cations or the positively charged ones as a percentage of that CEC, which is cation exchange capacity. And is it anions? The negatively charged ones are listed as parts per million usually? Is that?
Yeah, usually parts per million. Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Sometimes pounds per acre too.
Right. Okay. Good point. And so is it that the positively charged ones that are measured in percentage, they add up to 100%? That's why
right.
That's why the percentage. Okay.
Right.
And now let's take a minute to hear from our sponsors. It's with their generous support that we can bring you the podcast for free. This episode is sponsored by Nifty Hoops. Nifty Hoops designs and builds high tunnel systems for growers who want dependable results. What stands out is that Nifty Hoops tunnels are complete systems designed by experienced builders with the details worked out ahead of time. That means the core components are included from the start, like end walls, ventilation, doors, baseboards, and double-layer poly, rather than being added later. The tunnels are designed for real wind and snow loads, efficient assembly, and long service life. You can choose a self-build kit with guidance from written manuals and videos, or a community build where Nifty Hoops works alongside you and the project gets completed in one day. Nifty Hoops has built more than 1,500 hoop houses across the country, including many funded through the NRCS High Tunnel Initiative. They're known nationwide for predictable outcomes and ongoing support. If you're planning a high tunnel project and want it done right, you can learn more at niftyhoops.com. Farming is hard. Running it shouldn't be. Tend helps you plan your season, map your farm, and track every task from seed to sale. No spreadsheets, no guesswork, just seamless workflows. Tend is the all-in-one farm management platform that brings together planning, field mapping, fulfillment, real-time inventory, sales, labor, traceability, and accounting in one easy platform. Built for small market gardens, CSAs, and large diversified farms. Get started with a free account at tend.com. That's TEND.com. No credit card required. And now, back to the show. Okay, and so I have a pretty good idea of what cation exchange capacity is, but is that something you can say a couple words about, CEC?
Well, there are two similar numbers. One's called CEC and the other is TEC, total exchange capacity. And The main difference between there is the math for TEC also includes the amount of organic matter that's in the soil.
Oh, okay.
So the math just comes out a bit different if you use TEC instead of CEC. And the simplest way to understand it is that the exchange capacity is like the holding capacity of the soil. So if you had a low TEC of, let's say, like 7, you probably have pretty sandy soil and it can't hold very much. So if you're going to try and get your soil in balance and you're trying to improve the fertility of the soil in a low TEC soil, a low holding capacity soil, you don't need a whole lot because it can't hold very much.
Okay.
But it's going to disappear pretty quickly. And so you need to probably do it more frequently. But a larger holding capacity, a higher TEC or CEC soil is going to actually cost you quite a bit more to change it because it holds so much more. And so the actual number of pounds that might get recommended of calcium or any other nutrient is going to be higher, a larger amount that you have to buy for a larger holding capacity soil, a larger TEC, CEC soil. But it's going to hold it better. And so you're not going to have to do it over and over and over like you did in a low TEC soil that's constantly leaching out your nutrients.
Okay, so you're going to have to make the applications either way. It's just whether you're doing it in smaller batches over and over or bigger once. Okay, so would it be a good analogy then to say that like sandy soils are like a small container? They have a small container for fertilizer, and say like would clay soils be at the other end of things? Like clay soils have a big container because they have more holding capacity for that CEC for fertility?
That roughly holds true, yes. Mm-hmm.
Okay.
I have another comment along those lines if you'd like.
Yeah, go ahead.
So one of the things that when I look at a soil test with somebody, maybe that was done through some other lab that we don't use, or even if we do their test for them and they're first asking questions about it, they tend to look at the pH of the soil as like the first thing. And there's this kind of feeling out there that I see a lot that's really, really important. And it is important, but it's actually like a lagging indicator. It's not like, we should not be trying, in my opinion, to be explicitly managing the pH. So if somebody has like too low of a pH soil in their mind, and we have a range where we would like it to be 6.3 to 6.5 pH, and they might think, so I need to add calcium, right, to get my pH higher. Well, calcium does have that effect, but I wouldn't be doing that. I wouldn't add calcium to get your pH up. I would add calcium in the amount that makes sense for balancing the soil, and then the pH is going to automatically get there. It's automatically going to come either down or up into that 6.3 to 6.5 range all by itself. And the reason that we pick 6.3 to 6.5, one of the reasons, if you look at any one nutrient and see what is pH, how does pH affect it as far as its ability to come up into the plant well? Each nutrient is going to be a little bit different. Some come up better at an acidic soil, some at a pretty alkaline soil, and on average, most nutrients are going to come up best in that 6.3 to 6.5 range.
Right.
And that's also where your aerobic biology is going to be most healthy also, which is a pretty critical factor.
Yeah. Oh, well, that's good to know because, yeah, I've heard that for a long time is that basically you want slightly acidic soil because of the most nutrients are most available in that range. But I'd never heard that about the soil biology, which is obviously is an important consideration too.
Yeah.
So you're saying that if you get that calcium into about that 68% range, that pH will kind of take care of itself?
I would just say that's kind of true, but there are complicating factors, and one of them is magnesium.
Okay.
And it varies around the country what the general excesses might be that are common. And where I am here in Wisconsin, most of Wisconsin has really high magnesium soil.
Okay.
And Dr. Albrecht said we should be looking for it to be about 12%. But a lot of times when I first get to a farm, it might be like 24%. It's like double the amount of magnesium, or even higher. I've seen 35% magnesium. And when you have that high of magnesium, there's no real space in the cations for those other nutrients to be there. So we have to find ways to get it down. And sulfur would be a good way to get the magnesium down. And all of those things are going to impact the pH. Magnesium actually drives the pH higher, pound for pound, faster than calcium will.
Oh, okay.
So we tend to have higher pH soils here that we want to get down into that 6.3 to 6.5, and we can do it by reducing the magnesium rather than increasing the calcium. I kind of flip that around, but we would want the sulfur involved to help get the magnesium down.
Okay. Well, that actually makes me think of sort of like a theme on something else you were saying about how too much of certain things can be a real problem. And is it, because I know a lot of the soil elements, if you have too much of one, it can inhibit the uptake or availability of the others. And is it magnesium that excesses of magnesium interfere with potassium uptake? Is that the kind of thing that you're getting at, where excesses of one will interfere with other minerals?
Excesses definitely can do that. And like a common one a lot of times is nitrogen. An excess of nitrogen actually hinders the calcium in the soil. I've heard it said it kind of like burns up the calcium in the soil. And nitrogen is something that a lot of farmers pretty readily apply because it seems like a strong growth promoter. And it's one of the growth promoters. I mean, if your plants are looking yellow, why do they look yellow? And nitrogen might be the reason, but it might be that they don't have enough iron. It might be they don't have enough sulfur. It might be they don't have enough potassium. So nitrogen oftentimes is something that's kind of risky for farmers because it can be overapplied pretty easily. And then that's going to hinder your calcium. And if you've got a hindered calcium, now all of your nutrients are having a hard time making its way up into the plant. All because you put too much nitrogen, too much fish, too much whatever.
Yeah. Well, I could see that, right? Because I mean, like NPK, those are like the big three. I think people are aware that's why they're the macronutrients, because plants need a lot of those. So yes, I think in the past a lot of times farmers are like, like the crop looks a little yellow, like an easy thing to do is to put more nitrogen on there, but it sounds like that's a bit of an oversimplification. And so you say that calcium is like the truck, because does it help? You're saying it helps the other nutrients like get into and transport around the plant?
Correct. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. And the calcium, there are a lot of nutrients that have like a main helper. Have you ever seen the mineral wheel?
I'm not sure. I don't think I have.
It's a circle that around the edge of the circle are most of the minerals. And they draw lines between each mineral that has a relationship, a dependency. And if you stand back and look at it, the whole thing is just covered with lines because no nutrient, none, just function by itself in the plant. They all interact with others to do their job. And some of them interact with many, but a lot of them have like a chief kind of helper. And so we mentioned the calcium and the boron. The calcium really needs that supporting boron in order to do its job. So like in, let's say tomato production or any of the nightshade plants, blossom and rot, a lot of times we just kind of associate that with a calcium deficiency.
Right.
but maybe there's plenty of calcium, but you actually have a boron deficiency, and now the calcium can't do its job right because we don't have enough supporting boron in the picture. And we can see that with zinc and phosphorus, and with copper and potassium, kind of like major helper kinds of relationships in those minerals. So kind of earlier you were saying that you can look at a plant and you might have some good ideas what might be wrong there, but you like to do a soil test to know for sure. And I would say that's true also for tissue tests, that you can look at a plant and you can be pretty sure that it might be one of 3 things or 4 things that's going on, but you really might not know unless you're really good at looking at, is it dark green between the veins of the leaf or on the fringe? Or is it, there are a lot of interesting patterns that you can actually observe and make really good decisions about by looking directly at the plants. But you can still guess wrong. And if you have a tissue test that comes from a lab that turns it around quick enough, that can be really valuable in knowing what you ought to be doing. And then back to the soil, if we can just get things right in the soil in the first place and not have to struggle so much in the field during the growing season.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I'm glad you brought that up about the calcium and the blossom end rot, and with the calcium being the truck and the boron being the wheels, because that's one classic thing that we would see in tomato production, of course, is sometimes blossom end rot, even when there's enough calcium in the soil. And that opens up the possibility for me that there could be also a boron deficiency going on, because I know one thing, you're probably familiar with this too, is that we'll talk to growers who have had irrigation events. So as far as I feel like blossom end rot is maddening, because you can have blossom end rot if there's enough calcium in the soil. And the things that I usually attributed to blossom end rot, even when there's enough calcium, were irrigation problems. And it's frustrating because it could be either too much water or not enough water, right? Because I know that when you have big flooding events and fields sit wet, have wet spots for days at a time, that can interfere with the uptake of calcium. And conversely, when things get really, really dry, that can also interfere with the uptake of calcium, right? So I think that can be frustrating for growers to be like, well, my soil test says there's enough calcium. Why am I still getting blossom end rot? And then there's these complicating factors like, irrigation status or boron availability or anything like that. But that's interesting, because I had not heard that about the boron. I don't know what you call it, the alliance between calcium and boron, but that's another good thing to look at when people say trying to figure out why they have blossom end rot. Maybe look at the boron number also. Are there any other examples that come to mind? And it's fine if there aren't, of 2 nutrients either being, well, it sounds like there are a lot of synergistic. People can go look at find a diagram of that nutrient wheel. Are there any big antagonisms that come to mind, like where very high levels of one nutrient will stymie the uptake of another nutrient?
Yeah, I think, maybe the most common one was that nitrogen and calcium issue I was mentioning. But another thing that's kind of related to that is along the subject of pH.
Uh-huh.
So some people know, I'm kind of surprised some people say, when I ask this question, they'll say the answer like everybody should know it, and other people don't have a clue. And the question is, what does pH stand for?
Yeah.
And pH basically means the power of or potential of hydrogen. And so when we look at the cations, one of the cations is hydrogen. And most of the nutrients that you're looking at, they're all solids, but hydrogen is a gas.
Okay.
And we need hydrogen in the soil in order for the nutrient uptake to be efficient, basically. And so if everything was pretty much similar between 2 different fields, but one had a deficiency or maybe 0 hydrogen in it, the crops are just not going to perform like they do in that next field that just has some hydrogen there. And when the pH gets to neutral, 7.0, you'll have 0 hydrogen in the soil. So you can look at a couple soil tests, and if you see in the cation section, the hydrogen is some percentage, like 1% or 5 or 12%, somewhere in there. You'll look at the pH and you'll say, oh, that's below 7. And if you look at a field where it's 7 or higher, you'll see 0 for hydrogen. There'll be no hydrogen in the soil. As soon as that pH gets to 7, all that hydrogen gas just leaves. It can't hold in the soil anymore. And so that's one of the reasons also where 6.3 to 6.5 pH is a sweet spot, because then you have about 10% or so of hydrogen in the soil. And those chemical interactions that take place to bring the nutrients up into the plant are much more efficient. They work so much better. But yeah, so that when someone tells me, for example, that you need to have a 7.0 or higher pH to grow alfalfa, I just kind of shake my head and say, no, that's just not true. And alfalfa will grow in a 6.3 to 6.5 pH with the rest of the soil balanced, way better than an unbalanced 7.0 or higher soil. Yeah.
Okay. Well, that's good to know. I'd never heard that before. I didn't know that. So that's another thing going for that slightly acidic pH.
Right.
Well, I want to ask you about something that you told me when we were chatting before the interview. I know you told me you try to help farmers find cost-effective and sustainable approaches to building both prosperity and long-term resilience, and that those two concepts can easily be at odds with each other. So why do you say that cost-effectiveness and sustainability can be at odds with each other sometimes?
Well, I think it's largely a mindset. So sustainability or resilience or regenerative practices, those all require, well, I guess you could say sacrifice. They all require investment, and they require learning new things, maybe new practices. They might require additional equipment that you don't have. And it definitely requires a focus on how to build my soil so that it's going to be serving not only me in the business right now, but the generations that follow that may inherit this business. And so I'm doing work that pays not necessarily me right now, but is going to, in the long term, make a lot of sense. So a lot of the practices that we could be tempted to engage in right now that look like they're going to provide a quick turnaround might be the very thing that just shoots us in the foot and makes it so that not necessarily even a generation away, but maybe 2 or 3 years from now, we're going to be really sorry we did what we just did. Even though maybe you did get a better yield that year because of what you chose to do. So, you know, even just things like getting out in the field too early in the spring and squeezing out all that air and destroying all kinds of microbes, that can hurt you for a good 3 years down the road before your biology is going to recover from that.
Oh, right.
So learning self-discipline and control and not worrying about what my neighbors are doing and learning what the best practices are and being diligent there. So they're not really at odds, but they can feel like they're at odds. You know, the sustainability and profitability, for example.
Yeah. Okay, I gotcha. I know. Yeah, there's a lot of examples where you can take short-term gain over long-term pain. And, you know, I don't think anybody's in this business to, you know, farm for a couple of years and get out. And so, yeah, that's very important too. I think anybody who's farming knows it's a long-term proposition. So very important to look at the long-term. Well, so yeah, speaking of the long-term, I mean, in our discussions before the interview, you were talking a lot about growing nutrient-dense crops. While the benefits of nutrient-dense crops is obvious for the eater, I know there are other benefits to growing crops with high nutrient density. Can you tell us what are some of those other advantages that come with growing nutrient-dense crops?
Right. Well, I'm in the process of getting a document together that'll be available on our website but it's called Customers Noticing Reduced Produce Flavor. Soil factors that determine flavor of fruit and vegetables. But it's way more than flavor. There are a lot of different attributes of fruit or vegetable that are very dependent on the health of the soil. And a number of our customers are produce growers at auctions. And so all their produce is being marketed through that one medium. And it seems like those professional buyers really know what they're doing. You know, they have a real keen eye to what's a good piece of fruit or vegetable. And once they start buying, they also are keeping track of how that performs where they're moving it to, whether it's going to like a Whole Foods or wherever. They know that certain growers, their produce, the people like it better, and certain growers, the shelf life is longer, aroma is better, shelf life, flavor, texture is better. Green peppers, if you look at like the thickness of the walls, they're different. And yeah, it can be different based on variety and stuff like that. But if you take the same varieties and grow them on good, healthy soil that's well balanced and the soil biology is rich and dynamic versus relatively lifeless soil that's not balanced right, they look different, they feel different, they have different weight. Well, I'll give you this example. I had a customer that wanted to use one of our main recommended fertility products for the soil. And I encourage people, don't just believe me and buy a bunch of this. How about just buy some and put it on half of your field? And then you tell me whether it was a good idea or not. And so I had a green pepper grower that his fields were all running, I guess would be like east and west. And then he cut the field in half so that there was a west half and an east half. And the one side he treated the way he normally did, and the new side he was focusing on this product that would really promote biology and soil balance. And then at harvest time that first year, his wife said that she could tell, because the produce was going in to her and some others for processing them. And she said, I could tell exactly when we got to the floristem side. And I said, well, what do you mean? And she said, well, I could feel the difference. It's like, I don't even know how to describe it. It just felt different. And then when you smelled them, the green pepper aroma was much more significant. And so I don't know. There are just aspects to the produce that come out more like they're probably designed to be from the get-go if they're grown in soil like soil was designed to be.
Yeah.
Not all eroded and mined out like much of the agricultural land is now.
Yeah. Well, that's also important, right? Because I assume that most of the people in our audience are running vegetable or flower farms or want to be, right? And so I know a lot of our customers do a lot of markets where people know exactly who they're getting their produce from, right? Like farmers markets, CSAs. And so I figure customers don't care how many tons per acre you got. You know what I mean? They just want to buy the best tasting,
right?
Whatever. And so that's very important to market farmers, right? Because they, in many cases, are literally standing behind what they're selling, right? So, that would be important. But I've also heard things like potentially increase shelf life and things like that, which isn't the sexiest thing, people get it though. Like most farmers will understand it's important, if they can harvest something on, say, a Monday and that crop still be looking perfect on the following week's farmers markets. I mean, nobody farms for shelf life, but shelf life is, if you can have better shelf life, I think you want it. And then it probably makes even as much or more important for wholesale markets. Since I think what you're getting at is since it's gonna be sold to somebody that then is gonna go out to a store. So, and then it needs to still look good for a few days on the store shelves, right? So shelf life is pretty important. Well, Do you have any tips for how to grow nutrient-dense crops other than making sure the nutrients are in the soil in the first place? I assume that's the place to start. In fact, we had an article in the magazine some point in 2025 talking about how it's been well shown that I think something you were getting at, that nutrient density is declining in fruits and vegetables over time. And well, I mean, one of the things I remember from the article is just like, of course, if the nutrients aren't there in the first place, they have to be there in the first place to get into the plant. But there may be other things, like you're saying, like helper nutrients and good biology and things like that might help grow nutrient dense produce. So yeah, do you need any tips for nutrient dense crops?
Well, I think cover cropping is a really great thing. Anything we can do to help build the organic matter, because a lot of nutrients just leach. They leach out of the soil pretty easily. And I guess, I'm not sure how long ago this happened, but it seemed like for a while, agronomists in our country were not recommending a whole lot for sulfur. It was just kind of like, it just there, kind of not really that significant. But in recent, maybe decade or so, it seems like agronomists are recommending a higher level of sulfur. Like Dr. William Albrecht was thinking it should be like 40 to 60 parts per million of sulfur. So sulfur was one of the things that leaches quite readily. But when we look at the organic matter that we have, a lot of fields that I come to, they're like 1.5 or maybe 2% organic matter. And if we can get it up to at least 3.5 maybe, the soil is able to hold sulfur and a lot of the other nutrients. So sulfur is a good example in that right now, a lot of the fields that you look at would have maybe 9 parts per million. We want it to be 40 to 60. Maybe in a greenhouse it might be higher because for a few reasons there, but you're not getting that heavy rain and stuff like that can kind of wash things through. But if you can get the organic matter up, maybe our sulfur levels will be more like they were in the 1940s and 50s, where they were hundreds of parts per million. And we're trying to get people to get it up to 40 to 60 parts per million. But it used to be hundreds. And that's partly because the organic matter was much better then. And every time we rototill or plow, we're losing organic matter. And so it's coming down, 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 down. And so our ability to hold nutrients is going down, 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 down. So a thing that we can do to help produce nutrient-dense foods is to increase the organic matter. And one way is through cover cropping. We can use compost. We can make sure that our soil biology is very happy. It's got a good environment, whether that's being the right kind of pH or it's having enough carbon in the soil that they have homes, and we're not doing things that destroy biology. And yeah, when we do disturb the soil, we are disturbing the fungal networks and everything there, and that's harmful. There's value to disturbing the soil too. I just kind of like a more minimal disturbance approach. And we can make sure that we're not going out into the fields when it's too wet and damaging the biology that way. And then something people don't think about a whole lot, as far as in my experience, is the quality of the manure that goes out into fields. I mean, manure is a really important thing, I think, for most operations to be able to get their soil in good shape and help support the biology. But where did the manure come from? And how are the animals treated, or let's say medicated, where it came from? Because I know there have been experiments where they've gone out to pastures where the cows are chemically wormed, and they'll go out to a cow patty and they'll start measuring the biology in the soil, going out like every, I'm not sure how far spaced it was, but like maybe every 4 inches or something out. And the closer in they got to the cow patty, the less and less biology there was. You might think there would be more because there's manure sitting right there, right? With bacteria and things, but no. The wormers that were involved, I don't know which wormers they used, were hurting the soil biology. So when we start applying manure to fields on purpose, and we think we're doing a good thing, it can be really good, but we might also be doing something bad for the biology if we're not careful about what the source of the manure is.
Oh, right. Yeah. Well, that makes sense. Yeah, since wormers are supposed to kill, things living in the cow's system. And I guess it depends on the wormer, but do you know if most of those wormers, would they basically break down after some hot composting?
I don't know.
Okay, I realize I'm asking you to comment on, there's like a wide range of things that people could be using. It might be a little speculative, but that just occurred to me, whether or not the composting would get rid of that.
Yeah, and I mean, composting seems like it would be good at eliminating living pathogens because of the intense heat, but I don't know, what effect it would have in causing a chemical to break down into simpler components.
Yeah. Okay, because I forget what the organic regs are on using. I mean, I think you can use conventional manure in organic agriculture. Don't quote me on that. But as always, people go consult with your certifier before using anything.
Right.
But I guess the point is just to maybe know your animals. Know where. I mean, we always tell people to find out where their compost is coming from. I guess the same thing with manure.
Mm-hmm.
It goes for that.
Right.
And now let's take a minute to hear from our sponsors. It's with their generous support that we can bring you the podcast for free. If you grow for market, performance is everything. That's why so many farmers are turning to Burpee's Farmers Market. Dedicated to professional growers, Burpee is now offering non-GMO seeds in larger quantities, bred and selected for standout flavor, strong yields, and the kind of visual appeal your customers crave. All farmers market varieties are trialed at Burpee's Research Farm in Doylestown, Pennsylvania, where expert horticulturalists test for germination rate, vigor, disease resistance, high yield, and consistency, things that make a difference in the field and to your bottom line. The seed assortment includes USDA certified organic varieties, Burpee bred classics, heirlooms, and exciting new introductions. Burpee's been doing this for 150 years, and they're still creating new varieties with growers like you in mind. You can check out the full lineup at burpee.com/farmersmarket. That's burpee.com/farmersmarket. Today's episode of the Growing for Market podcast is brought to you by BCS America. On our farm, we've had our BCS two-wheel tractor for over a decade, and with no belts to slip, its all-gear-driven construction is still going strong. Though we originally got it for rototilling, we kept it even when we went mostly no-till because it can do so many other things around the farm. From snow blowing to making raised beds with the rotary plow to chipping wood, it can do just about anything you might need on a farm with the right attachment. Need to shred a cover crop? A BCS flail mower will make quick work of even the most vigorous cover crop and chop it up so it breaks down quickly. Want to stir in compost or amendments without inverting soil layers? A power harrow turns your BCS into a precise tilthing machine with depth control so you don't mix deeper than you want to. With so many attachments to choose from, it truly is the Swiss Army knife of farm implements. It's why, instead of saying two-wheel tractor, so many people just say BCS. Tractors and attachments are on sale through the end of the year. Visit bcsamerica.com to find sale pricing and your nearest dealer. And now, back to the show. And you were talking about raising the organic matter content, as a way to be able to hold more sulfur. Is that because does a higher organic matter make a higher cation exchange capacity? Basically, like as you increase the organic matter, you get a bigger bucket for fertility?
You do, yes. Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, because I've always heard organic matter is very important because that's one of the things that it did is to raise the amount of nutrients that the soil could hold. So, okay, I just want to make sure that I was understanding that right, that's where you were going with that. Okay.
Right. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Well, you had mentioned some natural products that increase crop resilience. Can you tell us what some of those are, or the kind, are there things that you've seen people have good luck with that you've recommended?
Right. Yeah. There's a relatively new product over the last 3 years that's come out called Crop Maximizer. And one of the ingredients in that, I don't know the name, it's kind of like a code name, like GL115 or something like that. But it's produced by a company called Gantech. And the way I understand it is they had some researchers that were actually doing some missions work in Africa, and they were noticing that you would see all this scrubby kind of half dead looking, deserty kind of plants out there. And then right in the middle of that, there'd be this big, huge tree that's bright green and looks like it's just thriving there. And so they're kind of agricultural engineering minds were wondering, how is that even possible? And so they ended up doing a fair number of experiments, getting different extracts out of the trees and finding out, what they were and trying to figure out how they worked. And they found that if they sprayed some of that on some of the crops grown locally there, those crops really changed the way they behaved. It was much more resilient, like those trees were. They were able to forage for water better. They were able to scavenge for nutrients better, even though the soil was not very good. And so eventually a company sprung up out of that called Gantech, and now they harvest some of these, they're called secondary metabolites, from various trees, quite a few different trees that are like that around the world. And they have that in this crop maximizer. So a lot of times your crops are going to be able to do better with even less inputs than you've used before, because the secondary metabolites just cause the plants to be so much more efficient in how they use and also their ability to get nutrients. So I've been liking what we've been seeing with that. I just started with that, I guess, probably like a little over a year and a half ago, but it's been around for about 3 years.
And is that a foliar, or do you spray it on the soil, or how's that applied?
It's a foliar, and some people use it too as like a seed treatment. So they'll drip it in when they're planting their corn, or they'll pre-spray whatever kind of seeds they've got with it as a stimulant, a sprouting and root stimulant. And so, yeah, that same Gantech product is also in a dry granular product called Soil Maximizer. And Soil Maximizer has quite a few different ingredients in it. It has azomite in it, and it has Floristim, which is a really good product that my friend Larry Streit that I mentioned earlier, his company mines that out of the state of Mississippi. And that is a very high trace mineral, high biology clay that's mined in Mississippi there. And it combines those with the Gantech product and soft rock phosphate, a few other things that just synergistically work really well together to promote resilience in crops. So we enjoy using that. It's not, the only products that we have, but they're two pretty stellar products, I think.
Okay. Well, it sounds like you had some, some stories from other customers that you worked with. Can you tell us about some of the changes in soil balance that you've seen, like almost like a before and after story, like how long it took to make changes and the benefit that those changes had in the end?
Yeah. Well, I'm thinking of one, let's see, this guy is an Amish produce grower in southwestern Wisconsin, and he had been growing produce for quite a few years, and then he moved and started a new farm. And the new farm, the first soil test showed that his magnesium levels were around 35%. And if you remember, we want it to be 12.
Okay, so almost 3 times as much magnesium as he should really have. Okay, all right.
Yeah. And I think that was about 5 years ago now. And so we've been working on getting his soil balanced and making sure there is adequate sulfur as part of that. And sulfur is one thing that can help the balance of magnesium to shift. And so now, today, his magnesium level is still quite a bit too high, but I think it's about 22%. So he went from 35 down to 22%. And that was huge. the amount of nitrogen that he uses a lot of fish in growing his produce. I mean, he uses a lot less now because the magnesium is not interfering with that so much.
Okay,
so,
that makes sense.
Yeah. You can make big shifts, pretty big shifts in the soil.
Yeah. Okay, so did that magnesium come down because the plants were actually using it up? Or if that's a ratio, like we were talking about, you've got your 100%, cation exchange capacity is going to add up to 100%. And I think you said you wanted 68% calcium, 12% magnesium. So that gets you up to 80%. Like, did he reduce the excess in magnesium by actually using up the magnesium, or did he apply, like you're saying, sulfur and other things to make the ratio of other cations greater so the percentage of magnesium was less? Does that, because I'm also thinking if cation exchange capacity is limited, right? There's it's the bucket size thing once again, right? It's that if you got sandy soil and you've got a small bucket, if you add more nutrients than the soil can hold, is that where you get the runoff? And so, sorry, that may be two questions right there, but I guess the first one is, was he able to get that percentage? Is it like a relative percentage of magnesium because by adding sulfur and other, working with you, perhaps they added some calcium? Was it that they were able to increase the amount of the other cations so that similar amount of magnesium is just less in relation to his other cations? Or I think you see where I'm going with that.
Yeah, I do.
Yeah, I'm thinking for people who might be in the same situation and want to troubleshoot it, basically, can they throw on more of the other cations to balance out the magnesium, or do they have to actually be working that magnesium down?
Yeah. Okay. So I should probably know the answer better to that than I do. but I will say that there's a lot of rich dynamics that go on among the minerals in there. And so it's not a great idea to just say, let's add sulfur to get the magnesium down. But if we say your sulfur is low, it's only 10 parts per million, and we want it to be 40 to 60 parts per million, let's add sulfur at a rate that's reasonable to, you can't change things too fast, or you can put things really out of kilter, including the biology. But like sulfur, you can add, depending on the cation exchange capacity or the TEC, you can add 100 pounds of elemental sulfur twice a year. But that's still going to take you quite a while to move your parts per million to 40 to 60. And so we would say, let's try and move your sulfur at a reasonable rate towards the range, and what's going to happen is something else is going to happen down here with the cations, is the ratios are going to start to change. And I don't know exactly what is happening that causes that, but I know if we bring it into the right range, then other things are going to shift to also come into the right range. So it is a little bit dangerous, in my mind, to try and fix problems in the soil by forcing things to move up or down with things that we know will. Because, for example, what if my magnesium was too high and my sulfur was 80 parts per million, which is kind of on the higher end? Would I decide to add more sulfur because I know it's going to drive down the magnesium? It's probably not the best approach to do it that way. So we're going to look at what all can we do to get things to the level they need to be. And there are going to be automatic shifts that start to happen. And like you were kind of getting at, some of it is just math. It's like if I add a bunch of calcium, then the percent, even though the amount of magnesium might not change in the soil, the percentage relative to the calcium is going to change. And a lot of things interact in the plants and in the soil based on their ratios, not just their levels. So just like an example, manganese and iron have a relationship that the iron should be about 2.5 times higher than the manganese. And you could have your iron at the right level, but you have manganese that's a little bit higher than the iron. And then all of a sudden, your plants behave like they have an iron deficiency and a manganese deficiency. You have plenty of iron, but the ratio is wrong. And so you might actually have to push the iron higher than you would normally want because your soil, for some reason, is really high in manganese. And if we can at least get them to shift so that the manganese is not higher than the iron, then all of a sudden your plant starts recognizing, oh, I have plenty of iron, I have plenty of manganese, let's go. So the ratios are really important. And so we would like to just move towards the Albrecht model of balance. And you start making moves in one area, and all of a sudden you see benefits happening over here that you didn't even do anything explicitly to, force.
Yeah, that makes sense. And another reason to take a soil test on a regular basis, right? Because I figure you take one soil test, you do some things in response to that, make some changes, and then next year's soil test shows how well that worked, right? Because it's living systems is, I feel like sometimes, we're making the best guess of what we can do to improve things out there. And sometimes we're wrong, or sometimes things don't, perform the way that we wanted them to. And another thing I'm thinking, I know some nutrients, they say either not to put the full complement on in 1 year, or you might just not be able to afford the whole thing. So I think sometimes people see it as almost like a down payment, like they'll pay because some, people have budgets, right? The fertilizer budget is what it is. And so I figure that also is a chance though for people, even if they can't afford 100% of what they think they should put down whatever they can, and then take that soil test the next year and see if it had the intended effect. And if so, maybe you can do the other half of the fertilizer the next year, or maybe it didn't, it's a living system. Maybe it didn't perform as you thought it would. And that gives you another chance to change course before the ship is entirely turned around. So it's another good reason to take a soil test every year then. And that's interesting about the iron and the manganese. I had never heard that before, but yeah, I feel like, I've taken a lot of soil tests for our own farm, but I also have always felt like it's a system that I didn't totally understand. I felt like it was a lot better to have the soil test, and we usually just shoot for the ppm or the percent that, our soil test basically, had an optimal range. But I also felt like there's a lot going on, right? And I mean, that's one thing. Soil is complicated, and I think it's hard to tell what's going on in the soil other than looking at your crops to see how they're responding to it. So that's why I'm also glad to see. It seems like there's a lot more research on soil, and particularly the life of the soil these days. I don't know if that's because we have better scientific instruments. We can, look at things under the microscope, or if it's just a matter of interest. Probably both, like most things. But I'm very encouraged by the fact that it seems like people are really interested in soil health and doing the research to learn more about it. Because I got to think that our soil management will only get better the more that we learn about soil health.
Right.
And I mean, on that note, are there any common soil misconceptions that you run into a lot that you'd like to dispel or talk about?
Well, one I think is that it's the idea that it's too expensive to really pay attention to your soil or to make the changes that are necessary. And it is true that some things that you might need to do to your soil might be kind of expensive. Like potash, for example, tends to be, varies from year to year, but tends to be a pretty expensive product to put on potassium. But some of the soil tests that I've seen, if you do the math, it says that they need like 650 pounds per acre of potash, but you can't even put that much on in a year without causing problems. Usually 300 is kind of like the top. But even just if it said you needed 300 pounds of potash per year, you have to weigh that with all these other expenses that you have. And so it can feel like it's too expensive. And sometimes a budget is really tough to work with, but you can still prioritize things. You don't have to do everything all at once. You can say, well, actually, one approach is I'm just going to pay attention to this small field that I'm growing the highest value crop on, and I'm going to do everything I can on that, like quarter acre or half acre or whatever it is. Or you can say I've got 12 acres that I'm growing different types of produce on, and it's all about the same value coming off. And so I'm just going to look at a financially prioritized, or let's say a agronomy prioritized set of steps that's affordable. So maybe I need to focus mostly on building soil biology, and some of the other things I just can't pay attention to right now because I can't afford it. But you can still make incredible strides towards it. And even sometimes you end up with like these mystery bonuses. I heard about, well, the soil maximizer or product. Somebody in New York had a test that said they needed potash, and it was again about like 300 pounds per acre, I think, that they needed, maybe a little more. And they couldn't afford it. They decided they were just going to put the soil maximizer on. And then they tested it again the next year, and they had 300 pounds per acre more of potassium showing up in their soil test. Well, how did that happen?
Yeah.
I mean, there is so much potassium, so much phosphorus out there. We have so many minerals out there that are in like thousands of pounds per acre, hundreds of thousands of pounds of certain elements. But when you run the test and it says you got 600 pounds or 200 pounds, and that's what's available. And so when we get things really working well in the soil, we start to access this bank of nutrients that are, they're there. And we don't have to add so much all the time. We can just allow the biology to start releasing the nutrients that are there so that our farm can thrive without having to be constantly buying more and more amendments. And I mean, that's kind of my goal, is actually to work myself out of a job, in a sense, on a specific farm by showing them, they're going to buy stuff from me for a while, but at some point they won't need it. And so that's fine with me because they're going to tell somebody else. And then I'll have another farm to work with that we can make a big difference there too.
Yeah.
So I really think that farms can be more and more self-sustaining and regenerative all on their own, but it takes us like setting the stage for that before that can really kind of start to move on its own. So yeah, I think that's really important to me, is helping farmers learn how to become self-sustaining and not having to, like the foliar spray, even the crop maximizer that I sell, I look at that as something that long-term they shouldn't have to do. I mean, some people just think you should feed the plant and not the soil. And why would I invest in the soil when I can just spray on it what it needs or drip it in? And then I'm thinking, okay, but you're going to have to do that forever. You're never going to get out from underneath that. And I know there probably will always be times when you need to be spraying something on for certain issues, and you start to see something show up in your crop and you need to supplement it, and maybe it's a pest issue or whatever. But those are still, in my mind, Band-Aids. And the real solution is having the soil so abundant that you've got the copper levels and the sulfur levels up high enough so the plant can fight its own fungal wars. I don't want to have to always be fighting it for it by spraying something on. And I don't know, just long term, and it can take a long time to get there, but I think the misconception is I can't afford to do it. And you can afford to take some step. Whoever you are, whatever kind of operation you have going, you can afford to do something, because it might even just be making your own compost.
Yeah. Okay. Well, that makes a lot of sense. I think a lot of people will be familiar with that old organic adage of feed the soil and let the soil feed the plant, that kind of thing.
Right.
And yeah, because I don't know, I guess a lot of people have been doing it that way, but I think if you thought about it, nobody would really want to be in that position of just having to buy their fertility every single year. At the same time, I know a lot of fields are unbalanced or have very low organic matter, and I figure that's probably, if you are starting from that, like We started our farm twice over, and I think both times we started with pretty much like run out, trying to grow vegetables on run out hay fields. You know what I mean? Like low organic matter hay fields that people hadn't paid a whole lot of attention to, or just kind of cutting the hay off of it every year. And so, we, especially by the second time we started our farm, I knew that we were looking at a years long process. I feel like it's easier to be unbalanced, to either have too much of things or too little of things. When you want to be, it's harder to find that balance right there in the middle. But, it may take a few years of working at it, but that once you can get, closer and closer to the balance, you'll stop having to do big applications of this or that, or stop having to do the bigger adjustments and more focus on fine tuning to keep things in balance, which sounds like where where you really want to be. It sounds like where you're trying to help people be. Which actually reminds me of something I thought of when you were talking about the potassium, because I know like potassium is so important for the ripening process. A lot of our customers are growing tomatoes and, a lot of other fruiting crops that need to mature. And you said something along the lines of only being able to apply about 300 pounds per acre. And I've heard that for some other things. Is that because more than about 300 pounds per acre would it just like overwhelm the soil? It's almost like even if you're really hungry, you can't eat 5 dinners at a time. You know what I mean? It's like,
Yeah.
is it just like those big applications overwhelm the soil, or is it that it's just more than the soil can absorb and they're going to run off, or both?
Depends what it is, but yeah, it could be both.
Depends on the nutrient. Okay. Do you know what it is in the case of potassium? Or even if you don't, that's a good rule of thumb to know, is like, there is such thing as too much to apply in a single year. I guess the more important thing is just knowing that there's a limit, like 300 pounds per acre on potassium.
Yeah, and most of the soil tests that you get, whether the recommendations are just kind of like handwritten on by an agronomist afterwards, or if they're actually incorporated into the printed test results, it's not going to tell you to put on a massive amount that's going to hurt you. They're going to document that even though it says you need 500 pounds per acre of potassium, of 050, let's say, you can't do that. You should just put 300 on this year. Yeah. So I think there are safeguards there to help know what you can and can't do.
Okay. I've heard a lot lately about people increasing bricks to discourage pests. Is that the same or similar to increasing nutrient density, or is that a whole different thing, increasing bricks? Like I thought there might be some correlation there. I mean, I know bricks is a measure of sweetness, but I thought there might also be mineral, like raising the mineral content might also raise your bricks. So I was just curious to ask about that, if raising bricks was similar or the same as raising nutrient density. And I know you said you have a good excess nitrogen example about potato beetles that might be relevant here.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I can go into that a little bit. On the bricks side of things, I think it's fairly complicated how you get to high bricks, because it's got to be efficient photosynthesis, and then you've got to have the well-balanced microbial life in the soil, and then you also need that balance of nutrients to be coming up into the plant. And like potassium is, well, it's hard to actually give a role to a nutrient. So like potassium is very important in the translocation of sugars, but so is calcium, and it's not quite that simple. But if you have a good base of nutrients in the soil and the microbial life involved in helping make those available to the plants, then you're going to be able to have the sugar levels and the mineral levels in general higher in the plant. And one of the reasons that people pay a lot of attention to bricks is because that's a good indicator of good flavor, right? It's a nice sweet fruit or vegetable. But also pests tend, not all pests, but a lot of pests can't cope with higher sugar levels like that. And so you'll see some plants that a bug will start to chew on, and then it just goes, oh, no. And it'll go somewhere else. And you can actually see some cases where a bunch of pests came in and they just started eating really fast, and they actually can die right on your plants because your bricks level is so high. That's pretty kind of a stark thing. But the example I was thinking of that I mentioned before was about potato plants. And this wasn't quite so much a Brix issue, but an excess nitrogen issue. And generally, too much nitrogen makes plants weak. It can cause them to grow fast and to be green, but it can also, if it's too much, it can make the plants weak. And I saw at a farm, actually a farmer's garden, he had 3 rows of potatoes and then another 3 rows of potatoes right up against them. And for some reason, they just mulched 3 of the rows, and the other 3 they didn't mulch at all. And the mulch was actually, it was a relatively fresh horse manure. And the nitrogen was pretty high. And so he wanted to know what was going on with those potato plants, because it looked like 3 rows were covered with bugs, and then 3 rows had no bugs. And at first I thought, well, I don't know if it's really that way. And so I went and I looked, and I thought I saw bugs on the 3 unmulched rows. But it wasn't. It was a branch from the 3 heavy mulched rows that was leaning over into the unmulched potatoes, and it was covered with bugs. And if you lifted it up, you could see, oh, that belongs over here. And underneath it, there's a potato plant that has no bugs on it. I mean, like none. And so all of those potato bugs just decided, hey, there's a great feast right over here, a weak, probably lower sugar plant, and we're going to leave these other 3 rows alone. And I really think that pests are basically God's cleanup crew for food that we probably shouldn't be eating in the first place. We have all kinds of other creatures that go around and clean up the garbage, dead animals that die on the side of the road or whatever. And bugs are doing that. They're getting rid of the stuff that's weak and not probably the best food for us to be eating.
Yeah. Okay, so the bugs were on the rows, the potatoes that got mulched?
Yes. Yep.
Okay, because I've heard, do you think that all that fairly fresh horse manure was probably high in nitrogen? Do you care to speculate? Because I know that the potato beetles were driven, there was too much nitrogen in the mulch plants or something. Because I've heard that a lot about aphids. I mean, it's well known that aphids, that over fertilized plants, aphids will gravitate to. Do you think something like that was going on with the potato beetles?
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Okay.
And that was just a little anecdotal, experience there, but it was really eye-opening to me when I saw the stark difference between the 2 rows.
Yeah. Yeah, I love those real world experiments that sometimes weren't designed to be experiments. I know it's like so many times I've been on a farm and why did they not mulch those other 3 rows? Like, I don't know, maybe they ran out of time. Maybe they didn't have any more of that horse manure. Like, I feel like farms are such a great real world. Like, sometimes they're not the most perfect experiments, but I think farms are, like living science experiments in a way of like, well, we did this over here and did this over here. Let's figure out why we got different results in the 2.
Yeah.
So that's a good example.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, that's really the majority of the questions that I have for you, Gregg, but it occurred to me I should ask. So how do people normally work with you? Do they reach out and say like, I just got this soil test. Will you take a look and like make some recommendations for me? Or how do you like, if people were interested to work with you, how does that process go?
Yeah. I mean, people can contact me through Facebook, direct messaging there. People also go to my website and just go to the contact or about us section, and they can get in touch with me there. There are some resources that we have out there. Like one of the resources I have is the top 5 questions to ask your market grower to get a sense of whether they're doing things that would be producing really nutrient-dense food for you to buy. And those are questions that someone that's growing for market can go read for themselves and ask themselves, am I doing this?
Yeah.
And people also can schedule different kinds of appointments with me if they just want a consultation or whatever. And I'm working at putting together something called harvesting resilience, your 5-year farm forecast, where I can look at some soil tests for them and come up with my guess as to what their farm is going to look like in 5 years if it kind of stays on the same path that it is, and ideas that they could put into play to change things. So
cool. Yeah, okay. I can see how that would be helpful. Well, is there anything else that I should have asked you or anything you'd like to say before we let you go?
I guess just kind of one thing, and that is, you mentioned early on that people that are growing for market generally they're not looking for high yields. They aren't necessarily really concerned about shelf life too much. And there's a very personal connection with the buyers, right? And so we care not only what the buyers think about us, that we're doing a good job or that we produce really nice tasting vegetables, but there's enough of a relationship there that I think we should be caring about the value of that food to their body, soul, and spirit. Because I think that the nutrient density of the foods plays a huge role in not just people getting filled or just enjoying the taste of things, but in their ability to function as human beings. And so to me, being in a job, let's say, where you can positively impact people's lives like that is huge. And so I really want people to, as they're deciding how they're going to grow, I really encourage people to contemplate what they're doing to other people's bodies. And, we talked a little bit about the nutrient density drop like over the last 80 years. And it's not just a little bit. It is a lot. Yeah. And even like the different B vitamins that people have, they're dropping so precipitously, or they have dropped so terribly, that it's no wonder that we have so many emotional struggles and things with people today. Dr. Linus Pauling said that every disease, every ailment, every illness, I think, goes back to mineral deficiency. And so if we can be affecting people's lives by producing things that really are pulling up way more nutrients, because some of them are not just like 20% lower or something. We're talking like 1,000 times lower or 100 times lower. And so I think we have a huge ability to impact the physical and then the emotional and spiritual, the mental capacity of people by what our jobs are in working with the soil and working in producing produce that is actually going to nurture humanity. So anyway, I just like to kind of leave it with that I want to encourage people who are growing for market that they have a huge, wonderful job and they can have such a positive impact on their local communities and beyond that also.
Yeah. Well, that's a really good point. That's a great place to leave it at, because I think you're right. Yeah, we've seen that there's a lot fewer nutrients in food than there used to be. And obviously, like, I think most of the people that I know who are farming, it does go beyond just making calories, for people. Like, I think a lot of growers do want to, they talk about the triple bottom line is be environmentally sustainable and financially sustainable and personally sustainable, including, making healthy food for people. And so I guess obviously growers care what their yield is because that's what it gets paid. But I think, for most of the, like growing for market type growers that I know, it goes beyond that. And they would also want to make something that's delicious and healthy for people too. And it's been my impression that food that's better for you, that's healthier, may also have increased flavor and, other things like you were saying that your customer may pick up on, because I haven't seen a whole lot of marketing yet about like our food is higher in nutrient density. And that may be part of the difficulty of calling that out as a benefit of one's produce, right? Because that's harder to express unless someone's going to go get their produce tested. And I mean, there's some interesting ideas. Like, I don't know if this is pie in the sky, but the article that we had in 2025 about decreasing nutrient density was talking to somebody who thought they were going to make an app that you could photograph the produce and it would tell you, have some way of telling you nutrient density. Now, honestly, I'm a little skeptical. Like, I think that's a really cool idea. I'll believe it when I see it, but because that would be really cool if somebody could say, without having to do lab tests and all the whole 9 yards, say like, hey, look, like here's a picture of our carrot versus a grocery store carrot. Our carrot is this much higher. So I'm not holding my breath until that app comes out, but I would love to give it a whirl if someone ever does. And I guess their idea is that, you could use things in the visual spectrum or something to somehow like make an assessment of how much the nutrient density of what was in that produce. I don't know, but it's like, just going along with what you're saying, it would be a really interesting idea if people could actually make an assessment on their own produce of like how nutrient dense it was. So
yeah, I think that is coming, and I can't remember the name of the association. I think it's the Bionutrient Association.
Yeah.
They actually have a device that does that already. It's just that it's not like scaled down yet to something that you could put in a phone. But it sounded like they were, making a lot of progress. But there is a device that they have that they can basically shine it at a piece of produce, and what gets reflected back gets interpreted by the app. The thing that they don't have is a whole lot of data that they can say, oh, yep, your carrot is in the top 20% or whatever. They don't have like standards that they can compare the data to so that it would be largely valuable to the marketplace.
Okay.
But so yeah, there are steps there. It might be a long ways away, I don't know, but someday that will be really awesome. I'm sure of that.
Okay, yeah, and that's not who wrote the article, but our author talked to them. That's the Bionutrient Association. Yeah, that's exactly who they were talking with. I guess they were hoping that they could turn that technology into, an app so people could do their own analysis. So
yep, that would be great.
Yeah, that would be cool.
Yeah.
All right, Gregg. Well, I've really enjoyed hearing about this. Where can people find you online or social media or wherever you want people to look you up?
Sure. Well, WisconsinMineralSolutions.com is probably the simplest place to go, WisconsinMineralSolutions.com. And then they can reach out to any of our social media and things straight from there, and get in touch with us by email also from there.
Okay. Well, perfect. Well, thank you so much for taking the time to tell us about what you do. I definitely learned a thing or three, and I bet our audience did too. So great. I appreciate it. And now they know how to get a hold of you if they want to talk more. So
right.
Thanks, Gregg. I really appreciate it.
Okay. Thank you, Andrew. It was good speaking with you. Enjoyed it a lot.
Take care. Bye.
Bye.
Thank you for joining us for this episode of the Growing for Market podcast. If you've been enjoying the show, please consider giving us a follow and a rating or a review. It really helps others find the podcast. For more tips and tricks from farmer to farmer, check out our magazine at growingformarket.com. Whether you're a commercial grower or just want to grow like one, subscribe to Growing for Market magazine for the nitty-gritty of growing, marketing, and the business of market farming. We publish 10 issues per year with articles written by experienced farmers on topics ranging from tools and techniques to farm business operations and marketing. If you've been listening to the Growing for Market podcast and haven't yet checked out Growing for Market magazine, we've made a change so you can try the magazine for free. We've added a free month to the beginning of all first-time subscriptions. Try out the digital or paper magazine for a month, and if it's not for you, cancel within 28 days and you'll never even get billed. All subscriptions get you a year of the magazine, plus 150 downloadable back issues from the last 15 years and over 1,700 archived articles. With digital subscriptions starting at just $39 a year, head on over to growingformarket.com and subscribe today to benefit from over 3 decades of writing by farmers, for farmers, in Growing for Market magazine.